Welcome to our exploration of who bears the brunt of a warming planet. In this video, we will delve into the multifaceted impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations across the globe. From indigenous communities and small island nations to urban poor and agricultural workers, we'll uncover the geographical disparities and socio-economic inequalities that exacerbate these challenges. Join us as we highlight the voices often left unheard and examine the urgent need for climate justice in a rapidly warming world. 1. Vulnerable populations. Low-income communities and developing nations are often at the forefront of climate change challenges. These regions typically have limited financial resources and weaker infrastructure, making it difficult to adapt to fast-changing environmental conditions. When severe weather strikes, these communities often lack the necessary resources for recovery. This susceptibility is further exacerbated by a lack of technological advancements and inadequate governmental support. Unlike wealthier nations that can implement expensive technology to combat climate change, these communities must rely on traditional methods, which are often insufficient. The disparity in resources results in a greater burden on these populations, leaving them to bear the brunt of a warming planet. 2. Geographical disparities. Countries in the global south, particularly those in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, face the harshest impacts of climate change. These regions are frequently subjected to extreme heat, rising sea levels, and severe weather events like typhoons and droughts. Geographical location plays a crucial role in this vulnerability, as these areas are often situated in climates already prone to environmental challenges. The lack of robust infrastructure in these regions means that when disaster strikes, recovery is slow and costly. Furthermore, economic constraints prevent these nations from implementing wide-scale preventive measures, leaving them in a precarious position as the planet continues to warm. 3. Indigenous communities. Indigenous peoples are disproportionately affected by climate change, largely due to their close connection with the land and natural resources. These communities often live in areas like the Arctic regions and tropical forests, which are highly susceptible to environmental changes. As the climate shifts, it disrupts the delicate balance of ecosystems on which indigenous communities rely for food, medicine, and cultural practices. The loss of biodiversity in these regions threatens not only their livelihoods but also their cultural heritage. Indigenous knowledge and traditions, which have been passed down through generations, face the risk of being lost as climate change alters their environment. 4. Small island nations. Small island nations such as the Maldives and Kiribati are at imminent risk due to rising sea levels. These islands face the terrifying prospect of becoming uninhabitable, which threatens the existence of entire nations. The encroaching sea not only endangers land but also contaminates freshwater supplies, compromising the basic necessities of life. Economically, these nations depend heavily on tourism and fishing, industries that are severely impacted by environmental degradation. As sea levels rise, these island nations find themselves grappling with the existential threat of displacement, with their cultures and ways of life hanging in the balance. 5. Agricultural workers. Farmers and agricultural workers, especially in developing countries, are on the front lines of climate change. They face increased risks from droughts, floods, and unpredictable weather patterns that directly affect crop yields. Agriculture is the backbone of many economies, and any disruption can lead to food insecurity and economic instability. For small-scale farmers, who already operate on thin margins, these changes can be devastating. The unpredictability of the weather makes it challenging to plan for the growing seasons, leading to reduced productivity and increased poverty. These farmers, who feed the world, are among those most affected by the warming planet. 6. Women and children. Women and children in developing countries are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. They often have less access to resources, education, and healthcare, which exacerbates their plight. Women, who are usually responsible for gathering water and firewood, have to travel longer distances as resources become scarce. This increases their exposure to environmental hazards and risks. Children, too, face health challenges due to changes in climate, with increased incidence of malnutrition and disease. In times of crisis, women and children are more likely to suffer due to social and economic disparities, making them more vulnerable to the ravages of a warming planet. 7. Urban poor. In urban areas, the residents of informal settlements or slums are often the most impacted by climate change. These communities lack adequate housing, sanitation, and access to essential services, making them more susceptible to heat waves, flooding, and other climate-related hazards. Poor infrastructure means that these areas can become unlivable during extreme weather events, forcing residents to seek shelter elsewhere. The urban poor often live in overcrowded conditions, which exacerbates the spread of diseases following climate-induced disasters. With limited resources to rebuild or relocate, these communities face an uphill battle against the relentless impacts of climate change. 8. Elderly and people with disabilities. The elderly and those with disabilities are at a higher risk during extreme weather events. Limited mobility and access to resources make it difficult for them to evacuate or seek help in times of crisis. Dependence on healthcare systems, which can be disrupted during disasters, further increases their vulnerability. In hot weather, the elderly are particularly susceptible to heat-related illnesses, while those with disabilities may find it challenging to access essential services. As climate change continues to alter weather patterns, these individuals find themselves increasingly at risk, underlining the need for inclusive and adaptive strategies to protect them. 9. Biodiversity and ecosystem. Climate change has far-reaching impacts on ecosystems and biodiversity. Species that are unable to adapt or migrate face an increased risk of extinction. The loss of biodiversity not only disrupts natural ecosystems but also impacts communities that rely on these systems for food, medicine, and livelihoods. Coral reefs, for example, are dying at alarming rates, affecting fish populations and, consequently, the communities that depend on them for sustenance. Forests, which are vital carbon sinks, are also under threat, further exacerbating climate change. The delicate balance of nature is being disrupted, with profound implications for the planet and its inhabitants. 10. Economic inequality. Climate change exacerbates existing economic inequalities, creating a widening gap between wealthier nations and individuals and their poorer counterparts. Wealthier nations have the resources to invest in adaptation and recovery, such as building seawalls or developing resilient infrastructure. In contrast, poorer communities struggle to cope with the immediate impacts and face longer recovery times. This inequality is not just a matter of resources but also of opportunity, as those with wealth and influence can shape policies in their favor. Climate change, therefore, becomes not just an environmental issue but a social and economic one, demanding equitable solutions to address the challenges it presents.